Brad Berg with Encompass Purpose, and I'm here with Kate Parsons today, the FaceBeef coordinator in Tennessee. And you handle a lot of counties, but do you want to tell us what you do exactly?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first, thank you so much for having me today. This is an honor to be here. My name is Kate Parsons, and I serve the 15 counties in southeastern Tennessee through the Office of Faith Based Initiatives. And it's something really unique that the state of Tennessee does. They incorporate lived experience with the faith groups to reach more people, because here in Tennessee we have an abundance of faith-based groups, and we are unfortunately losing a lot of folks to suicide and overdose. So they saw the opportunity to go within those faith groups and help more people. So that's what I get to do. I get to go into 15 counties and help connect faith groups to different education, different trainings, different resources that they can better serve the people in their counties and communities.
Now, when we spoke before, you mentioned recovery capital and that you love recovery capital. What does that mean to you?
So in general, recovery capital is the total sum of the resources that can help you sustain your recovery. So, in my opinion, too often, recovery is focused and all that pressure is put on the individual in isolation without looking at the community around them. And, our brains are still healing in that first 1 to 2 years. So it's really hard to completely rebuild the life that we need. So recovery capital is going to be looking at the people around you, your social supports. It's going to be looking at your community, your culture, your faith groups. It's going to be your physical, tangible things like housing and healthcare, even things as basic as having an ID, or a birth certificate. And then when you go into personal capital, that's where you talk about all the resources that you have inside. So all the psychoeducation I learned in my treatment, of my coping skills, my grounding techniques, things like that. So when somebody has really a lot of supports in all those other areas, it makes their sustained recovery a lot more feasible.
Yeah, and that's one thing we're finding. We do a year-long program here, and nothing against short programs, but they only have so much time to fit in so much information. Are you seeing more long-term programs in Tennessee?
I am. I absolutely am, because I'm seeing that most people are realizing that, if you spent years in this, place of addiction, you're in survival mode the whole time. They know that, years in addiction can't be fixed in 21 days for the most part. I think that, most people aren't able to get treatment. A lot of people aren't able to get treatment, but I think any amount would be good, but I think the longer the better.
What do you see in the barriers there? Why treatment isn't accessible?
A lot of times, what I'm seeing is, for financial reasons, there's no insurance. People don't have the opportunity to go into treatment, or even if they do have insurance, it might only cover, a partial stay or limited outpatient visits, as opposed to the real long-term type residential treatment that a lot of people need.
Yeah, and isn't that funny? We just had a person here that he had no insurance, so he went and got insurance, and then it says $1,500 deductible, but then in the paperwork it's up to 8,000. So, so even if they have insurance, sometimes financially it can be a real burden. So what we do here is we try to do a sliding scale. So we'll go down pretty low because it's more important to help people than the financial part of it. So,
That's so great that you guys do that.
do you find a lot of people are starting to put the patients first rather than profits, or is it kind of a mixed
I do
bag?
see
Or
that. Yeah, I do see that a lot, and I love when I see that. I feel like we have this really unique recovery community in East Tennessee. So a lot of my friends work for different treatment centers, and I've seen all of them, when they can't match this person's insurance to their plan, or if they don't have any grant beds, they'll call a neighboring facility and say, hey, can I get this person in? So the majority of the people that I get to work with every day are just passionate about helping people, and they're like you said, they're seeing the person and not the dollar sign.
and I have a question just out of my curiosity. Do you see the state advancing with their protocols and modalities, or are they more set back to the standard way how it used to be?
I see a lot of growth happening, which is really exciting for me. But I see a lot of, the main things that I've seen is in a lot of faith based treatment or faith based sober living, there's not as much psychoeducation involved. And what I'm seeing is a lot of those faith based groups are now bringing in that education to show, because we need to learn about ourselves and our disease. I also see that, they're bringing in the church as well. So they're having that social support too. One great thing that I really like to see is a lot of faith groups are bringing in that clinical medical aspect of it and allowing patients to be on mental health meds while they're in treatment. Because, co-occurring is very common, or co-occurring disorders are very common. But a lot of times with the faith groups, they don't want to take someone in who has a diagnosable mental illness because they don't feel equipped that they can handle it.
Have you heard of Carl Jung?
Yes.
Okay, I was just reading a thing last night and I found it fascinating. One of his theories was alcoholic and drug addicts were alcoholic and drug addicts because they were trying to fill a void that only can come from God. And by filling that void, it numbed it, so it didn't give them the happiness, but it took away that thirst for God. And that once you come to that point where you realize that and start your journey with God, you don't need the alcohol and drugs anymore. And I know for me that was true. I walked around with a hole in my chest for about 40 years, and then when God came in, it was instantly fulfilled that I wanted for them first 40 years.
And that's beautiful. I love that. I have a kind of unique perspective on that part. I was raised in church. I went to church my whole life. I led small group Bible studies in my home. And then when I relapsed, I was in my late 30s and I was angry at God. And I was incredibly disconnected. Our relationship was so fractured that when I was in treatment, I told them that I'll stay sober, but I can't do any AA or NA or any of those groups because I don't want to admit there's a higher power. And
Wow.
yeah, which is shocking considering what I do now. But at that time, my tech in the treatment center, I remember she took my hands and she said, I don't want you to overthink the higher power thing. She said, my higher power is her higher power was her friend who had passed away from an overdose. And her name was Becca. And she said, you can borrow Becca until you find your own. And so for the first year of my recovery, I prayed to someone in the sky named Becca, and my family and friends and kids, they all thought that I had lost it. But over time, the more I started talking to Becca, I realized I was talking to God. And that open door led me back into the relationship with God that I have now. And I like to tell that story to folks because I know it's out of the norm and it's definitely off. But if someone's so fractured in their relationship with God, you can't just bring Jesus to them right away and say this is the only thing that's going to save you. Even if you know that to be true, because they might not be ready to hear it. And so since I was received by people who, were really encouraging to me and encouraging me to learn more about my relationship with God and to expand my understanding and reasoning, and that's why I feel like I got to the place I am now. So I love helping people find their way back after they've been lost.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we do here. We don't push it, it's involved in everything, but you have to let somebody accept it on their own. And until they're ready to surrender, that's where the battles come in, where you try to self medicate and things like that, too. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely feel like I was doing what you said about Carl Jung. I definitely was trying to fill a void inside of me because my relationship was so fractured with God.
do you find in Tennessee you have a lot of co occurring disorders? I know with our program, we have up mid to high 90% of co occurring. Do you see that in Tennessee quite a bit?
Yes, absolutely. The majority of the people that I associate with are in recovery, and almost all of them, have co-occurring mental illness. And if they don't, then they've definitely experienced trauma in their childhood. It's very rare for me to meet someone who has an addiction or has an addiction history that didn't experience trauma prior to that addiction.
Yeah, and it's surprising. I think they only say it's 70%, but it's not around here. It's pretty high, really. And I don't know of anybody that comes through our sober living program or our treatment that didn't have the trauma or mental health issues or both, because the trauma can cause that too.
Absolutely. Yeah. My director at the state level always says that marijuana isn't the gateway drug, that trauma is the gateway drug.
Very true. And a lot of times, especially we work with men, it's really hard for men to open up and try to discover things. Matter of fact, Carl Jung again, shadow work, but try to figure out why they are the way they are. For me, I know I probably read 300 business books and not one book on myself years ago. And so you don't discover anything about yourself. You almost walk around like you're not in control, but once you figure out you are in control and can educate yourself on yourself and unlearn things that you've learned, it really helps.
Absolutely. I love the way you said that, unlearning things, because I felt like I had more things to unlearn than learn in my recovery, definitely in the beginning. All the limited beliefs that I had about who I was as a person and what I was made for and what I was capable of. I had to unlearn all of those, messed up beliefs that I had.
Isn't that funny too, how you get the cognitive biases and distortions and you believe them as truths until you get to that point where you go, oh, maybe that's not the facts.
Yes,
Kind
absolutely.
of like praying to Becca.
Yes.
So what are the main things you do with your program where when you go out and talk to people and speak to people, what are your main initiatives?
So, our main things that we do, my job as the faith based coordinator is mostly to provide education and training. And that's one of the things that I love to do. I love to facilitate groups. I love to expand people's minds because what I find when I'm working with these congregations is that they don't dislike these people like me. They don't, want bad things for them. They just don't know how to help, or they're misinformed about what led that person to addiction in the first place. So I love getting to talk about the addicted mind and what happens to the brain when that person is, going through their addiction struggles. I like talking to them about stigma and that, unconscious bias that we all have. I tell a story frequently about my dad. He has two children in recovery. And when I started my job, I asked him, I thought it'd be a good idea for me to talk to his church. And I said, do you have people who, have issues that come to your church for help? And his response was, he said, yeah, we get drunks in here all the time. And I said, okay, but Dad, they're not going to come if you call them that. That's an offensive term. So my dad is a wonderful man. I know that he, didn't mean it that way, but that's what I think for the most part is happening, is that folks just don't understand how important and powerful the language that we use to talk about people and to them really is. And then the second part of our initiative is the hybrid and lifeliners, and they connect individuals to treatment. So if you do have somebody, if somebody calls and they need help but they don't have insurance or they don't have any way to pay for it, they find a way all the way across the state.
Wow, that'd be wonderful. I wish we had that here. You mentioned something, I don't want to call it ignorance, but not knowing about mental health or the addiction part of it. And I always say the worst addiction isn't an addiction, it's denial. And when you do educate the people, do they go out and really embrace it and start helping them?
I've seen that they do. I have. I have this one presentation where I talk about the power of your story, because in recovery we're taught a lot to tell our story and that it's powerful and healing for us, but nobody really tells you how to tell it, where it's not going to hurt you or your audience. So I go through tips for safe storytelling, how to protect your feelings and how to protect your audience's feelings. And I have had people who have come up to me after that and said, I've never given my story before, but now I'm ready to tell it. So that's an immediate change that I get to see. Once I was going to this church and they were having, they had someone who had suicidal ideation at their church, one of the parishioners, and they had asked me to come do suicide prevention training. And when I did, I taught them about 988, the suicide, crisis line that they were unaware of. And 3 months later, I went to their church, and as soon as I walked in, they had those big TVs up in the sanctuary, and they were rolling slides that had the number 988 on them.
That's awesome.
And then after the service, the young man came up to me and told me, he said, I want you to know that I was the person that was struggling with suicidal thoughts. I went to the pastor. He taught me about what you taught him, and I called 988, and they helped me. So just to be a little part of someone's story like that is amazing.
And isn't it amazing when you just touch one person how much it all pays off? Because it's not always a fun thing that we do, but there's a lot of wonderful things that happen. Like something that happened to me the other day. 3 of our people are going to take peer counseling now. So they're going to go out and touch people's lives, and before they got here, we take a lot of people that are furloughed from judges and, from prison or jail. So their life has came that much of a 360 in 1 year that
Yeah.
they went from being incarcerated to now going out and helping people.
Yeah, yeah. I have a couple faith-based recovery homes that I go to, and I visited this one. It's Renew Women's Ministries in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and they let me take a tour of the rooms. And in the rooms, I saw women that had their windowsills lined with plants that were thriving. This one of them had a bunch of pictures of their children, and then another bed had a row of vitamins. And each one of those things made me so happy, because I know when I was in active addiction, I wasn't caring about my family members. I wasn't caring about taking care of myself. I certainly wasn't taking care of any plants. So it's beautiful to see these people completely changing. Now not only they're taking care of themselves, but they're taking care of their communities and surroundings too.
Yeah, and one thing, it used to be such a negative with addiction. And I think that's changed now where people understand. Is that something you guys teach too? Is where, for instance, I'm an alcoholic, instead of saying that, you wouldn't say I'm a cancer, so
Right. Yes.
I used to have a problem with alcohol, and making it a more positive thing, like some other illnesses, I think has helped a lot. Now, there's still a stigma, but do you believe by teaching that that's helping quite a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I can see moving the needle, whether small or large steps. I can definitely see it happening. And when I'm doing my presentations, I like to bring in a lot of data and research so that people know it's not just me saying this. And one of my favorite researchers is Dr. John Kelly out of Harvard University, and he did a study with 517 highly trained clinicians, and he gave them 2 vignettes, 2 little paragraphs about a client, and they were identical, with the exception that one client was referred to as a substance abuser, and the other one was referred to as someone with substance use disorder. And the research showed that everyone that saw the substance use disorder was less likely to recommend punitive damages. They were more likely to believe that that person was capable of recovery. So I like to tell that story a lot, because our words can literally mean, whether or not somebody's going to be able to seek treatment and, be able to reach that sobriety or that recovery level.
And now, do you guys teach anything on contingency management too, or?
I don't personally.
Okay.
I know a lot of people across the state probably do, though.
Well, and it's something we started here, and I knew about it actually from Opioid Resource Network, and took some schooling on it, and I thought, well, we'll try it. But boy, it made a difference. And that's, just giving out little things, little rewards like certificates. I was shocked how much a guys for 2 days talked about it and sent pictures to their parents or their families, or, and now we're doing more where if you do well for a month, you get to reach in the fishbowl, and maybe it's an hour off of class, or you get to stay out an hour longer, or, things like that. And it's made such a difference being on the positive side compared to, the standard way of doing things.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't
I
know.
love that because, That reminds me of like the strengths-based approach, the positive approach as opposed to the tough love or negative kind of way that it's been historically treated.
Yeah, I don't know why they call it contingency management because it doesn't really line up with what it is, but it does work really well where the guys just have really embraced it. Now you see them too in between trying harder so that they do get one of the things out of the fishbowl or a certificate or, and it gives them purpose and direction and structure.
And with every certificate they get, they're just building that human capital inside of themselves too, so that they can be stronger in their own recovery.
Yeah, it's amazing when they achieve things. I don't know if I told you this story before, but we had somebody in here that was in and out of prison for 19 years. And before he came here, he hadn't passed a UA in 14 years. And so when he came here, he passed his UA and he actually said, "Can I keep this?" And I was like, "Sure." And then the next week, he passed it again and he said, "Can I keep it and give it to my mom?" And he said this was 14 years in the making. And when he graduated, he was a president here, where run like a democracy. And he started his own company and he's doing really well now a year or two after. And that's what's most important to us. It's not how they do in the program, it's afterwards, because that's what we try to build on, is going back into the real world and having so much of a better life.
I think that's so important, and that speaks again to the importance of long-term programs. Courts are gone.
Yeah, and we try to really support and get them back in the real world. But like we talked about earlier, if you've been, whether it's addiction or not, if you've been cognitively thinking a certain way for 20 years, it takes, that time to change your thought process and the neuroplasticity to kind of work on them neurons and get them changed around. But it's really fun to see too over the year how people have changed. We have one young man that came in that, if I told you his childhood, it's very traumatic. But he came in, he was just sloped over the table the first night. And now, if you've seen him, he has a great job. He's the president and just very confident and doing really well. And even he's young, he's 22, but some of the guys that are twice his age really look up to him because he has changed so much.
I was going to say those are the voices that I like to elevate, and put in front of a crowd, because that's the biggest thing that's going to break stigma is showing people, we can recover, we can build these beautiful, meaningful lives, and we can help other people. And so stories like that I love to hear and I love to share with people.
Yeah, and I find a lot of it does stem back to their childhood, something in their childhood. He had, no childhood, but he had Narcaned his dad 4 times by the time he was 11, and then started shooting up at 13. So when you come from that, there's very easily could have ended up in prison the rest of his life. Or, you can come to a long-term program and work on yourself and now be a great citizen. So, and
Yeah, and it is work. Yeah.
I don't know how, because it would be so hard to be a secular agency and not be faith-based, because a lot of the problems we take on aren't ours to take on. And when you can hand them off to God, it makes it a lot better. When you don't have to worry, something's going bad, but the outcome's the same. God's already designed it. It makes it just a lot easier. I would hate to be an atheist. And I have a
Oh
joke I
yeah.
got to tell. I tell every time I mention atheists, but I don't believe in atheists, so they don't exist. And nobody laughs at it as much as I do. So, how many people such as yourself are in Tennessee doing what you do?
In terms of peer support specialists, we have over 1,400, I believe. So we have a huge number of peer support specialists across the state. In terms of the faith-based initiative, I believe there's a little over 20 of us, and we're stationed throughout the different grand divisions. And there are 7 faith-based coordinators, which is what I am, and the rest are lifeliners or hybrid lifeliners, and they are the ones that connect individuals to treatment and resources. And I believe there are about more like 15 of them.
Now, are you a private nonprofit or are you part of the state or?
Our grant funding comes through the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. I'm employed through Hamilton County Coalition, and they very intentionally placed all of us inside anti-drug coalitions because they already have, the trust of the community. They already have the partnerships. They're experts in what we're talking about. So I work through Hamilton County Coalition through a grant from the state.
I would love to see something like this happen in Missouri here because I think it would help so much. We're finally getting to the point, I think, because of the federal administration, that faith base is accepted. And the data proves it works better. So I don't get why you wouldn't want to do it. But, I hope they start something like that up in this state too.
I would love that. I would love to see it replicated everywhere because it is so effective, and I've seen it myself. And I think some states are starting to create some things like this. But yes, I would love for it to be a national model.
So, and then, there's organizations too now, like Opioid Resource Network, that just are really expanding people's knowledge of it at the same time. Not necessarily, the Christian model, but just what addiction is and what it isn't. And like you said, I think that's a big part of it because it's not always a fun subject. So people try to avoid it until they learn about it and learn it's like everything else.
Yeah, yeah. And it is messy, it is complicated, so a lot of people don't want to touch it for that reason. But I think that a lot of that pressure gets relieved when I tell them you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to fix them. They're not broken. You just have to sit with them in their brokenness. And once they learn that, they feel a lot more confident and comfortable reaching out to people who need it.
And it doesn't matter to me if it's mental illness or addiction or even, say, physical illness. Until somebody's ready to get healed, you can't do much besides just be there for them. And when they're ready, and it's usually, unfortunately, for most of our people, rock bottom. But once it's a good foundation to start with, is what I always say.
Yeah. I like that.
So it gives you a good foundation to start from, and you can't go, backwards. So we try to always have them be in the present and keep them cognitive thoughts in their mind so that then they can redo the cognitive thoughts when the triggers come up, when, things come up like that.
Yes. Yes, I love that. And it takes work and it takes practice, but it can be done. I think I was about 2 years into my recovery before I really learned that I learned about neuroplasticity and that I could change my thinking patterns. And after a lot of work, it finally happened. Thank goodness. But I wish that everyone could experience that, not just individuals with a substance use history. I feel the world would be just a wonderful place if everyone could take the time to do that. A non-addiction rehab or something like that could make everyone really do some inner work and realize, where they feel like they need to grow, what's been hurting to them, what lies have been told to them and about them, and what they can do with their lives.
Yeah, and it's funny, 47% of the time we're on autopilot. Not really like when you drive home and go, oh, how'd I get home already? And people know way more, like, say, about their cell phone than they do about their own brain. And my poor wife, she gets sick of watching documentaries and everything else about the brain. But once I started learning about the brain, I just can't stop because it's so fascinating. And if
Yes.
people, like you said, had to go to treatment to learn about themselves, it would make so many people happier. And I think because we don't do that is why behavioral addictions now are, I mean, up 130%. That's crazy.
Yeah. Are you seeing a lot more in your practice?
Yeah, and it's because parenting got to be where you hand them their cell phone and or a video game, and so they don't have the interpersonal communication skills. A lot of times the younger generation actually feel uncomfortable talking to somebody else rather than texting or things like that because it gets into the behavioral patterns that you have to break. So people actually used to pick up the phone and call each other rather than texting.
I'm
The,
still old school about that.
are ya?
Yeah, I write handwritten notes. I have a paper calendar. I'm a very analog person. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because some of them old things, when you do them, I just got the other day, I sent somebody a thank you note, and they just couldn't believe it. They were like, all the years of doing this, nobody's ever thanked us. And that used to be a common thing, but we've got away from a lot of that. And I think we need to get back to some of it. There's a lot of great things with technology, but use it as a tool rather than a lifestyle.
Yeah, yeah. And to go back what you were speaking about a minute ago, I think that emotional regulation is really important, and that's not something that we're taught. So in one of my classes, I say to the audience, does everybody remember when they were first taught about physical exercise and how to take care of their body? And people raise their hand, and they'll talk about the Presidential Fitness Award when they were in elementary school or something like that. And then I say, okay, and do you remember how old you were when you were taught how to properly regulate your emotions? And it's crickets. Because we're not. So I think it's really important that we all learn about that and learn how important that pause is before we react to something.
I just had somebody tell me that they've been that way since they were 15. It's like, do you realize how wrong that is? You evolve and grow. And that's if you can get people to realize that. And now it's wonderful to see the guys, how they thought a certain way for 20, 30 years, and now think a different way. And they recognize it. I just had a person in class the other night say that. I got back to that criminal mentality, thinking like a thief, and I had to correct myself.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of just has a ripple effect into your life in recovery. So when I learned about myself and I learned my character and my values and what was important to me, I had more self-worth. And by having that self-worth, I eliminated the unhealthy relationships. Because a lot of times we get into those unhealthy relationships because we think that's all we're worthy of. So once I had that inner strength, I was able to, reach for more secure and happy friendships and relationships. And again, it's just one of the beautiful blessings of recovery is that it doesn't stop. It's an ongoing, growth and journey.
You brought up a point I want to ask you about personally, and if you've seen it. I find that addicts, or former addicts, have problems with boundaries, and they try to please and give too much. And I'm not sure if it's from years of trying to cover up their abuse as far as the addiction, or if it's just in our personalities more. Did you have to work on your boundaries and setting healthy boundaries?
I do. So before I started working in the recovery space, I worked in homelessness services, and I would help individuals who had serious mental illness get access to Social Security benefits. And I loved helping people, and I loved that job, but I did not know what boundaries looked like. And I completely threw myself into helping, my clients to the point where, I overspent so I could buy Christmas presents for them. And then I left my account in trouble, my bank account in trouble. I remember, neglecting some clients because one client, had a terminal illness and needed more attention. And eventually I ended up realizing I needed to leave that space because I wasn't able to handle that. I was burnt out. I did not have any boundaries. I did not know what self-care was. I think that I had that version of self-care that we all see on TV with the bubble bath and, the big piece of chocolate cake. Some people have a glass of wine. And so when I teach about self-care, I say those aren't bad things. Those are indulgences, though. That's not self-care. So you have to learn what actually is going to refill your cup and what is just something that you think is going to refill your cup.
Just last hour, I was talking to somebody about that because us being helpers, a lot of times we'll empty our cup and then still keep going. There's nothing left in the cup. So you got to stop and take a step back and kind of recharge your batteries.
And I have a class on that. I teach about overcoming compassion fatigue and burnout. And the majority of that is just saying, it's not caused by caring too much, it's caused by your lack of self care that you have. So I try to teach specific things they can do, or try to do that might help that, like sleep hygiene, like affirmations, meditations, things like that.
Isn't it funny how much, like you said, the meditation, or I call it calming, and sleep is such a big factor in health? And it wasn't really known 20 years ago, but it is a big factor. You need both them things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, and now they even know physical health and metabolic health, is a part of the brain function and helping. It's all connected.
I love learning about that stuff too.
So what do you have coming up, or the organization? What do you have coming up?
So something that I'm really excited about is there's International Overdose Awareness Day, and that's every year on August 31st. And there are a lot of local, events throughout the counties that I'm going to, but I'm planning one that's specifically faith-based. So it's a faith-based International Overdose Awareness Day, and I'm going to have people who have experienced overdose, and they're going to come tell their story about how God has been working in their lives and what they're doing now. I really like it when people talk about, when they tell their story in a way that points towards hope. So I like for about this much to be about trauma and about that much to be about the transformation.
Kind of funny.
I'm excited for that event.
I always say I'm not a therapist or a counselor, I'm a coach, because you have the trauma, but you don't want to live there. You want to work with it, but then what can I do to make my life better? This is terrible what happened to me, but it doesn't mean it has to be me. There can be a new me.
Yeah. And shame is
What
such a big factor in that.
it is. Shame and what did I do wrong and things like that. It gets to be where you didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes parents drive me a little nuts because everybody likes to bash on Gen Z, and it's like, well, who are the parents? That was you, you know.
Yeah. Um, I feel the same way about my recovery. Since I was in active addiction, I was one of those people that hurt other people, and I could sit in that and just camp out in that shame and that pain, but that's not going to be good for anybody. So I feel like you can also be accountable for your actions without permanently letting it rule your life. So I've made my amends. I've done all the apologizing and repaired the relationships that I can. So I tell other people in recovery that too. Just don't camp out in that space, because that's what's going to lead to recurrence abuse, in my opinion.
Well, and I talk to my guys about that too. When you make amends and you've apologized, you have to forgive yourself. Jesus has already forgiven you, so if he's forgiven you, why are you holding on to it? And I think you're right. I mean, you can shame yourself into a lot of dark places. And you at some point just have to go, I did this, it was terrible, but I'm going to move on.
Yeah. And that's another time I remind people, God knew what you were going to do before you did it. He knew all the mistakes that you were going to make, and he still wanted you here, and he still wanted you to recover. So, yeah, that's really empowering for folks.
Yeah, we do a thing too where I talk about the disciples and some of their mistakes. Because God didn't ask us to be perfect, he asked us to follow him. And I think that's really important for people to see. We remember David from thousands of years ago, and he did some pretty terrible things at times. And he was a man after God's heart. So God isn't asking us to be perfect. He's perfect. He already has that handled. So you just have to try to align with him.
Absolutely.
Well, it's great having you on. Is there anything else you would like to add, or how we could get in contact with the
So,
organization? Or
absolutely. If you want to look up the Faith Based Initiative in Tennessee, we have a great website that has a lot of resources for different people across the state of Tennessee and beyond. Hamilton County Coalition, the coalition that I work for, is pretty amazing. So if you're in Tennessee, that'd be a great one to go to. And then I have my own page, which is the Southeast Tennessee Faith Based Coordinator page. And I post a lot of great information about trainings and different resources and events that people can go to.
sounds good. I really appreciate you being on. Hopefully, you'll be on again soon.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you so much, Dr. Berg.
Thanks.